I didn't know my life was about to split cleanly in two because of something as small, as ordinary as a sink full of dishes. People like to imagine divorces starting with screaming matches, slammed doors, or dramatic confessions. Mine began on a quiet evening, with fluorescent kitchen light reflecting off plates I didn't have the energy to wash, and a man who looked at me like I was already gone. My name is Mia, and I was 23 when my husband told me he didn't love me anymore. We had been married for just over a year that had already cost me everything. I once thought defined me, my dream graduate program overseas, the city I had imagined myself growing into, the version of myself who believed love was something you sacrifice for and were rewarded in return. That night, I came home after a 10-hour day, lectures, shelves of books at the bookstore, aching feet, and found the dishes piled high again. Travis was on the couch, headset on, shouting into a game like nothing else in the world existed. Not me, not the marriage, not the quiet erosion happening between us. I remember standing in the doorway, my hand on the wall to steady myself, thinking, if I say something wrong right now, everything might fall apart. So I said nothing. 20 minutes later, he asked why I was making so much noise. That was when the truth slipped out. Casually, effortlessly, like he'd been waiting for an excuse. The next evening, he sat across from me on the couch, eyes flat, voice calm, and said, I don't think this is working. I think we rushed into getting married. I need space. I want a divorce. No yelling, no tears. Just a sentence that landed heavier than anything I'd ever heard. What he didn't say out loud, but what I felt in my bones, was worse. That the woman who came back sick, exhausted, and broken from overseas wasn't the woman he wanted anymore. I agreed to the divorce that night, and when he took it back hours later, crying at 2 in the morning, promising he'd made a mistake, I said yes again. That was the moment my life truly began unraveling, quietly, slowly, and in ways no one else could see. Because the hardest part wasn't him leaving, it was what staying did to me. When I try to explain Travis to people, I always start with the summer. Because in the beginning, he didn't feel like a mistake, he felt like a miracle. 3 years ago, I met him during a break between semesters. One of those sticky, sunburned summers where everything seems possible, because the days are long and the nights don't end until you're laughing on a porch somewhere. I was 20, juggling a part-time job and the kind of academic pressure that sat in my chest even when I was trying to relax. Travis was 22 then, freshly hired at an insurance company, proud of his real job, proud of being the guy who had his life figured out. He was charming in a quiet way, not flashy, not loud, the kind of guy who listened with his whole face, eyes steady, eyebrows lifting at the right moments like he was actually absorbing you, not just waiting for his turn to talk. We started fast. Too fast, if I'm being honest, but fast felt good back then. That summer, we spent almost every day together. He would drive 2 hours to see me on weekends when I went back to campus early. He showed up with coffee before my morning classes like it was nothing, like he hadn't just spent half his Saturday on the highway. He remembered the tiny things I mentioned without realizing I was mentioning them. One time my roommate's cat died, and I came home trying to act like it didn't matter because it wasn't even my cat. I was in my room with my back against the door, crying so quietly I could barely hear myself. There was a knock, then Travis came in with a grocery bag. A box of tissues, my favorite takeout, a cheap little candle that smelled like vanilla. He didn't ask me what to do. He didn't lecture me about being too sensitive. He just sat on the floor next to me and said softly, "You don't have to pretend with me." That version of him, gentle, attentive, became the foundation of everything I believed about our relationship. 6 months into dating, I got the email that made my whole world tilt. I'd been accepted into a graduate program overseas. It was the school I'd wanted since I was 16. I still remember being that teenage girl, hunched over a laptop, reading about the program late at night like it was a secret doorway to the life I was meant to live. The acceptance rate was less than 5%. I'd spent years shaping my life around that dream. Grades, internships, language classes, research experience. I had sacrificed weekends, parties, sleep. So when I got in, it wasn't just good news. It was proof that my hard work mattered. When I told Travis, he looked genuinely excited at first. He hugged me so hard my ribs hurt, spinning me around our tiny kitchen like we were in a movie. We talked about long distance. We talked about time zones. We talked about him visiting during breaks. Then, like it was the most logical thing in the world, he suggested we get married. "So I can come with you," he said, eyes bright. "Spouse visa. We were going to get married eventually anyway, right? Why not just do it now?" I should have stopped and asked myself why it felt like a solution for him more than a commitment to me. But at 21, hearing the man you love say, "I want to follow you across the world," feels like devotion. So I said yes. We got married at the courthouse 2 weeks later. His best friend was there. My roommate was there. The whole thing was so quick it barely felt real, like signing a document instead of making a vow. My parents weren't thrilled. My mom kept asking, "Are you sure you're not rushing?" My dad was quieter, but his silence had weight. Travis's parents didn't come. "They have work," he said, shrugging. I swallowed the discomfort and told myself it didn't matter, because Travis was there, because love was supposed to be enough. Looking back now, that was the first tiny crack I ignored. And once you start ignoring cracks, you can convince yourself a whole collapse is just normal settling. The plan was simple, at least on paper. I would go overseas first. Travis would stay behind for a few months to finish things at work, then join me once the visa process was complete and his job situation was sorted. Temporary distance, short-term sacrifice, a shared future waiting on the other side. That's how we framed it when I left in September. The reality felt nothing like the plan. The city I landed in was beautiful in a way that felt unreal. Narrow streets, old stone buildings, conversations flowing in a language I was still learning to catch up with. I should have felt exhilarated. Instead, I felt alone in a way I hadn't anticipated. My days were consumed by an intense academic schedule, lectures delivered at full speed in a language that required constant focus just to keep up. By the time I got back to my small apartment each night, my brain felt bruised. Travis and I talked less than we'd promised ourselves we would. Not because I didn't want to, but because every call felt like work. He'd ask about my classes, then circle back to the people in them. "Who were you with today? Any guys in your group projects? You go out after class?" Or... At first, I brushed it off as concern. Long-distance insecurity. Normal stuff. Then his questions started carrying an edge. If I mentioned grabbing coffee with classmates, he'd go quiet. If I talked about studying late at the library, he'd joke about me finding a foreign boyfriend. Once, after I mentioned a female friend in my program for the third time in a week, he laughed and said, "What? Should I be worried about women too now?" I remember freezing mid-step on the sidewalk, phone pressed to my ear, not sure how to respond. It wasn't said angrily. That almost made it worse. I told myself he was stressed, that he missed me, that once he joined me, everything would settle. But weeks passed. The visa process dragged on. Paperwork, delays, phone calls that ended with maybe next month. Then his job complicated things further. Apparently they couldn't afford to let him take extended leave right now. "I'll figure it out," he kept saying. "Just a little longer." By November, my body gave out before my optimism did. What started as a cold turned into something heavier. Fever that wouldn't break. A cough that burned. I woke up one morning struggling to breathe, chest tight like someone was sitting on it. The hospital stay blurred together. IVs, monitors, white ceilings, doctors speaking slowly so I could understand. 4 days. 4 days in a foreign hospital, terrified and exhausted. Travis couldn't come. "Work won't let me," he said, his voice flat with guilt that didn't quite sound like urgency. "I'm so sorry." I cried after that call in a way that felt childlike and humiliating, curled on my side, shaking, trying not to make noise in a shared ward. My program advisor visited me on the third day. She sat on the edge of the bed, hands folded, and spoke gently but firmly. "You're pushing too hard. Your body is telling you something. I strongly recommend you take a medical leave and go home." Home. That word felt like failure. I flew back in December, weaker than I'd ever felt, and moved into the apartment Travis had rented while I was gone. It was supposed to be ours. Instead, it felt like someone else's life I was temporarily borrowing. That winter, I barely moved from the bed. Physically, I was recovering. Mentally, I was unraveling. Travis would come home from work and find me exactly where he'd left me that morning. He'd try to coax me out, suggest dinner, a short walk, anything. But the idea of leaving the apartment made my chest tighten again. I'd lost the program, lost the city, lost the version of myself who believed she was brave. And somewhere in the quiet of that apartment, I started to sense that I was losing him too. He didn't say it yet, but the distance had already taken root. By February, my body had mostly recovered. My lungs stopped burning when I climbed the stairs. The constant fatigue lifted enough that I could think clearly again. I enrolled in a local university to finish my degree, something practical, something safe, and found a part-time job at a bookstore near campus. The smell of paper and ink felt grounding, familiar in a way nothing else had since I came back. On paper, I was rebuilding. In reality, I was running on adrenaline and obligation. My schedule filled quickly. Classes 4 days a week, work 3 evenings plus weekends. I was gone most mornings before Travis woke up and came home most nights after he'd already settled into the couch. He worked a standard 9 to 5 at the insurance company, predictable and contained, while my days stretched long and uneven. That's when the problems started to surface. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in small, grinding ways that wore me down. I'd come home after 10 hours on my feet to find dishes stacked in the sink, crusted, cold. I'd asked Travis, gently at first, if he could load the dishwasher before I got home. "I forgot," he'd say, shrugging, like forgetting was a neutral fact instead of a pattern. Laundry sat wrinkling in the dryer for days until I rewound the cycle and started over. Groceries ran out without him noticing. I made the lists, I did the shopping, I remembered what we needed. I tried to talk about it. "I just need things to feel more even," I told him one night, perched on the edge of the bed. "I'm exhausted." He frowned, defensive already. "I do stuff," he said. "You just don't notice. I take out the trash. I mow the lawn. I do my share." So I started keeping a mental tally. It wasn't intentional at first. It just happened. A running count in my head of who did what, when, and how often. And once I started paying attention, I couldn't stop. 70%. That was the number that kept coming back to me. 70% of the housework, on top of school, on top of work, on top of recovering from losing the life I'd planned. The night everything cracked open was in March. I closed the bookstore at 11. My feet ached. My head buzzed. All I wanted was a shower and bed. When I walked into the apartment, the kitchen light was still on. The sink was full again. Travis was in the living room, headset on, laughing into his microphone, completely absorbed in his game. He didn't look up when I came in. Didn't pause. Didn't acknowledge me at all. I stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment, watching him like he was a stranger in my home. Then I went to the sink and started washing the dishes. I wasn't slamming them. I wasn't trying to make a point. I was just tired. Movement slow, water running, the quiet clink of plates against porcelain. 20 minutes later, Travis appeared in the doorway. "Why are you doing dishes so late?" he asked, irritated. "You're being really loud. I'm trying to hear my game." Something in my chest tightened. "Because they needed to be done," I said. "You could have waited until tomorrow. Or you could have done them earlier." His jaw set immediately. "I had a long day at work." I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it felt unreal. "So did I." "That's not the same," he snapped. "My job is more demanding." I stared at him, hands submerged in soapy water, my whole body humming. How is sitting at a desk more demanding than being on my feet for 6 hours after sitting through lectures all morning? "You're being unfair," he said. "You're picking a fight." I didn't answer. I dried my hands, walked past him, and went to bed without another word. He slept on the couch that night. I told myself it was just a bad argument, that couples fought, that this was normal stress, that we'd talk it out in the morning. We didn't. The next evening, Travis came home, unusually quiet. He set his keys down carefully, like he didn't want to make noise. "Can we talk?" he asked. We sat on opposite ends of the couch, a physical distance that felt deliberate. He stared at me for a long time before speaking, like he was rehearsing something he didn't want to say. "I don't think things are working," he finally said. The room felt too small. "What do you mean?" "I think we rushed into getting married," he said evenly. "I don't know who I am anymore. I need space to figure things out." My heart started pounding. "And what does that mean for us?" He swallowed. "I want a divorce." The word landed like a dropped plate, sharp, irreversible. I stared at him, trying to keep my breathing steady. "Is this really about the dishes?" "No," he said. "It's about everything." "Do you love me?" I asked, my voice barely holding together. He hesitated. "I care about you," he said, "but I'm not in love with you. I haven't been for a while." "How long?" I whispered. "Since you came back from overseas." Something inside me went very still. I thought about my parents' divorce, my mother begging my father to stay, the humiliation of it, the inevitability. I had promised myself I would never be that woman. So I nodded. "Okay," I said. His eyes widened. He hadn't expected that. "You don't want to try counseling?" he asked quickly. "You just told me you don't love me," I replied. "Counseling won't fix that." He didn't argue. We sat there in silence until he stood and said he'd take the bedroom. I could sleep on the couch. I agreed. After he closed the bedroom door, I sat alone in the living room until after midnight, laptop open, quietly searching for apartments I could afford on a bookstore salary. That was the night I learned how easily someone could dismantle a life you'd built around them. I don't remember exactly when the crying started. I just remember sitting on the couch long after the apartment went quiet, the blue glow of my laptop reflecting off the dark TV screen, my fingers hovering uselessly over the keyboard. Studio apartments, commute times, rent ranges that didn't care how tired or heartbroken you were. Most of them were impossible, too expensive, too far from campus, too small to feel safe. I bookmarked one listing that might work if I picked up more shifts at the bookstore, just one. Like a lifeboat I wasn't sure I was allowed to climb into yet. Around 2 a.m, I heard footsteps on the stairs. I closed the laptop slowly, like I was doing something wrong. Travis came into the living room, eyes red, face drawn. He sat down beside me, closer than he had been all evening, knees angled toward mine. "I messed up," he said immediately, his voice cracked. "I don't want a divorce." I didn't answer. He kept talking, words spilling out now, urgent and tangled. He said he didn't know why he'd said those things. He said lying in bed alone had made him think about everything we'd been through. He listed memories like evidence. My making him breakfast in bed for his birthday, the night we stayed up until 4 a.m. talking about nothing, the way I used to fall asleep with my hand on his chest. "I can't imagine my life without you," he said. "I love you." I turned to look at him. "You told me you didn't." He shook his head, desperate. "I was wrong. I was stressed, confused. But I do love you. Please, can we try again?" I don't know why I said yes. Maybe it was the hour. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the part of me that had already given up so much and couldn't bear the thought of this being the final loss. He hugged me, tight and shaking, and I let him. The next day, I acted like someone who believed him. I started calling therapists, left voicemails, filled out intake forms. Waiting lists stretched months into the future, but I put our names down anyway. 3 different places. Travis said he'd looked into individual counseling too. "I need to work on myself," he said earnestly. I believed him. For a while, things looked better. He started doing the dishes without being asked. He brought me coffee in the mornings like he used to, setting the mug gently on my desk before I left for class. He told me he loved me multiple times a day, too many, almost, like repetition could overwrite memory. But something had changed, something I couldn't name, only feel. When he touched me, my body tensed before my mind could catch up. When he kissed me, there was nothing, no warmth, no comfort, just a hollow awareness that I was being touched by someone who had once so easily imagined a life without me. I replayed his words constantly. "I'm not in love with you. I haven't been for a while." They looped in my head when I was shelving books, when I was sitting in class, when I lay awake next to him at night staring at the ceiling. I started watching him, not consciously at first, just noticing, reading his moods the way you read weather signs. If he was quiet after work, my stomach tightened. If he seemed distant, I scrambled internally, wondering what I'd done wrong. I didn't tell him any of this. I didn't know how to explain that agreeing to stay hadn't erased what he'd said. It had just buried it alive inside me. 3 weeks after that night, we finally got a call back. A cancellation opened up a spot in May, couples counseling. Our counselor's name was Simone. She was in her 50s, calm, steady, the kind of woman who made you feel seen just by how she waited for you to finish speaking. The first session was awkward. Travis and I sat at opposite ends of a small couch while Simone asked about our history, our communication, what brought us there. She recommended individual counseling for both of us as well. I found a therapist through my university's mental health services almost immediately. Travis went to 3 sessions with someone covered by his insurance. Then he stopped. "She wasn't a good fit," he said. "I'll find someone else." He never did. The couple's sessions helped, on the surface. We made a chore chart. Travis cut back on video games. We instituted a Friday date night. Dinners, movies, attempts at normalcy. If you looked at us from the outside, you might have thought we were healing. But inside me, something kept tightening. Every improvement felt conditional, fragile. And the more I tried to be a good wife, to be easy, agreeable, grateful, the smaller I felt myself becoming. I didn't realize yet that I was already preparing for something worse. I just knew that staying was costing me in ways I didn't yet know how to measure. By summer, our marriage had taken on the appearance of stability. That's the cruelest part, I think, how convincing it looked. We followed the chore chart like responsible adults. Travis washed dishes without reminders. He folded laundry. He came home on time more often. Our Friday date nights became routine enough that friends commented on how healthy we seemed. Simone nodded approvingly during sessions, noting our improved communication and shared effort. On paper, we were doing everything right. Inside me, something was rotting. I became hyper-aware of Travis in a way that felt less like love and more like surveillance. I watched his face when he walked through the door, scanned his expressions for signs I might be losing him again. If his voice was flat, my chest tightened. If he was quiet during dinner, I assumed the worst. I started adjusting myself around his moods. If he seemed stressed, I softened. If he was tired, I became accommodating. If he was distant, I tried harder. Not because he asked me to, but because I was afraid of what would happen if I didn't. I was constantly managing the emotional temperature of our home, like one wrong move might trigger another, "I don't love you." I didn't notice when it started, but at some point, I began apologizing for everything. "Sorry I'm late. Sorry I forgot the milk. Sorry, we can watch whatever you want." Even my disagreements came wrapped in apologies, like I was asking permission to exist. I stopped voicing opinions that might create friction. I made myself smaller, quieter, easier to live with. Travis noticed. One night in early November, we were lying in bed, the room dark except for streetlights slipping through the blinds. "Why do you say sorry so much now?" he asked suddenly. I froze. "What do you mean?" "You apologize constantly," he said, like 10 times a day, for stuff that doesn't matter. I laughed it off. "I don't even realize I'm doing it." He didn't push, rolled over, fell asleep. I lay there staring at the ceiling, my throat tight, wondering when I'd turned into someone who needed to apologize for taking up space. Around this time, I stopped going to hangouts with his friends. It happened gradually, quiet withdrawals no one commented on. It started after a barbecue at his friend Marcus's house in July. Travis's whole friend group was there, guys he'd known since high school. I'd always been friendly with them, but never felt truly welcome. I was Travis's wife, not really one of them. At some point in the afternoon, I realized I'd left my phone in Travis's car. I went outside, unlocked the door, and his phone lit up in the cup holder. A message preview flashed across the screen. Something about me. I didn't plan to look. I swear I didn't. But my body reacted before my conscience could intervene. I picked up the phone and opened the group chat. Messages from March. Right after the night, Travis first asked for a divorce. Marcus telling him to go through with it. Tyler saying I sounded exhausting. Another friend saying Travis could do better. And Travis, my husband, replying that they were right, but he'd try counseling first. I felt like the ground tilted. I took a screenshot and sent it to myself. Then I deleted the sent message so he wouldn't notice. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. I went back inside and didn't say a word. For the rest of the barbecue, I smiled when spoken to, answered briefly, then drifted away. When Travis asked later what was wrong, I said I had a headache. After that, I stopped attending gatherings. When his friends came over, I stayed in the bedroom. Travis noticed, but he didn't ask why. I think he was relieved. I also started saving money, quietly, carefully. I opened a separate bank account he didn't know about. Every paycheck from the bookstore, I transferred whatever I could spare, sometimes $20, sometimes $50. It wasn't much, but watching the balance grow gave me a strange sense of control. By October, I had nearly $2,000. I told myself it was just an emergency fund. I knew better. The breaking point crept closer in subtle ways. Travis grew frustrated with my anxiety, with the way I hovered, the way I needed reassurance. One morning, after a night where I'd barely slept, I asked him if we were okay. "Yes," he said sharply. "Are you sure?" He sighed. "I've been doing everything you asked for months, and you still act like I'm about to leave." "I'm trying too," I said quietly. "I just can't forget what happened." "You need to let it go," he snapped. "Good people make mistakes. You can't hold this over my head forever." Something shut down inside me then. I stopped bringing it up, stopped asking questions, stopped seeking reassurance. If pretending everything was fine was the price of staying, I would pay it, until I could afford to leave. Simone noticed the change during our next session. "You seem quieter," she said gently. "I'm fine," I replied. Travis agreed. Simone didn't look convinced, but she moved on. From the outside, we probably looked like a normal married couple. Inside, I was disappearing. And I didn't yet know how dangerous that was about to become. The night fear entered my body. It didn't arrive loudly. It slipped in quietly, wearing Travis's voice. A few days after he told me to let it go, he came home from work different. Not angry, not sad, just off. He barely touched his dinner. He went to bed early without turning on the TV, without asking about my day. I lay beside him, staring into the dark, my mind looping through every possible mistake I might have made. By morning, I was exhausted from guessing. "Are we okay?" I asked as we stood in the kitchen, coffee brewing between us like a neutral third party. "Yes," he said too quickly. "Are you sure?" He exhaled sharply. "I'm trying really hard, Mia, and it feels like it's never enough." "I'm trying too," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You have to move on," he snapped. "You can't keep punishing me for one mistake." I didn't respond. That was the moment I decided to handle everything on my own. I stopped asking questions, stopped checking in, stopped sharing my fears. I went to class, I went to work, I came home, I cooked dinner, I went to bed. We said "I love you" like a script we both knew by heart. Then January arrived. New Year's Eve passed quietly. Travis fell asleep on the couch before midnight. I watched the ball drop alone on TV, champagne untouched, feeling strangely detached, like I was watching someone else's life through glass. On New Year's Day, he was already awake when I came into the kitchen, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee. "I want a divorce," he said. Just like that. I set my mug down carefully so it wouldn't shake. "Are you serious?" "Yes," he said, calm, certain. "I've been thinking about it for a while. We're not making each other happy. It's better to end things now." "This isn't like last time?" I asked. "No," he said. "This time I'm sure." Relieved. That's the word he used next. "I actually feel relieved." He packed a duffel bag and left 20 minutes later, saying he'd stay at a motel while we figured things out. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I just sat at the kitchen table until noon, staring at the empty chair across from me. Then curiosity, or something darker, pulled me toward his online life. I remembered his Reddit username. I searched it. His most recent post was from that morning. He wrote that he'd left his wife, felt bad about it, but didn't regret it. When someone asked if he was sure, he replied that he'd never been more sure of anything in his life. Something inside me snapped cleanly in two. I called the landlord, told him my husband had moved out and I needed the locks changed immediately, paid the locksmith in cash, watched him replace the locks while my hands trembled just enough to notice. When Travis came back that evening and his key didn't work, I opened the door but didn't step aside. He begged, apologized, took it all back. I let him in. I don't know why. That night, he cried. He wrote me a poem about second chances. He held me like I might disappear if he let go. I didn't sleep. The days that followed were worse. He oscillated, affectionate one moment, distant the next. On January 3rd, he told me he loved the idea of being married more than being married to me. On January 4th, he said he didn't mean it. On January 5th, I reached out to Brody, one of his childhood friends, who wasn't part of the current group. I asked gently if Travis had done this before, if there were patterns I should know about. Brody told me the truth. Multiple breakups, manipulation, a pattern. That evening, Travis came home early. He closed the door behind him and walked toward me slowly, sat beside me, put his hand on my face, turned my head so I had to look at him. He asked quietly if I meant any harm by contacting Brody. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I nodded. He let go, stood up, and said we were fine. I sat on the couch long after he went to shower, my skin still burning where his hand had been. That was the moment I understood something with terrifying clarity. Love was no longer the issue. Safety was. And once fear enters your home, it never leaves quietly. The morning I left, the house was quiet in a way that felt final. Travis went to work like it was any other day. He kissed my cheek on his way out, told me he loved me, grabbed his keys, and walked out the door without looking back. I stood in the hallway listening to his car pull out of the driveway, my heart pounding so loudly I thought I might be sick. The second the sound disappeared, my body moved on instinct. I didn't sit down. I didn't think. I packed 2 bags. That's all I allowed myself. Clothes, my laptop, chargers, important documents, the things that couldn't be replaced. I moved fast, hands shaking but steady enough to get the job done. I left behind furniture, books, decorations, pieces of a life that no longer felt like mine anyway. I wrote a note. It was short, direct. I asked him to remove his belongings from the apartment within 30 days. I didn't explain. I didn't apologize. I took my wedding ring off and placed it next to the note on the kitchen table. I didn't cry until I was already in the car. Driving to my mother's house felt surreal, like crossing an invisible line between who I had been and who I was about to become. When I pulled into her driveway, she opened the door before I even knocked. She didn't ask questions. She just hugged me and helped carry my bags inside. That kindness broke something open in me, I stayed with her for 2 weeks, slept in the guest room, let myself exist without managing anyone else's emotions. I filed for divorce that same week. There were no shared assets beyond some furniture. Travis didn't contest it. The process was mercifully simple. The finality wasn't. For months afterward, I slept poorly. Woke up in the middle of the night convinced I'd heard footsteps. I flinched at unexpected noises. I replayed that moment on the couch over and over, his hand on my face, his voice low and controlled, trying to understand when love had turned into something that felt like a threat. But slowly things shifted. I stopped apologizing for breathing, stopped scanning rooms for danger, stopped shrinking. I found a small studio apartment closer to campus. It was quiet. Mine. I graduated in May. In June, I got a full-time job at a publishing company. Steady, decent pay, work that didn't make me feel invisible. I didn't talk to Travis again. He texted a few times in the beginning. I never replied. Eventually, he stopped trying. I reconnected with friends I'd drifted away from during the marriage. I started doing things I'd quietly given up, wearing red lipstick because I liked it, eating mint chocolate chip ice cream because I wanted to, going to concerts alone because I didn't need permission. Each small choice felt like reclaiming territory. I still think about the graduate program I gave up. I still wonder who I would have been if I'd stayed overseas, if I'd chosen myself sooner. Some days that grief hits hard. But I know this now. Leaving didn't mean I failed. It meant I finally listened. To my fear, to my instincts, to the quiet voice inside me that had been begging for safety all along. I'm 24 now. My life isn't perfect. Healing isn't linear, but it's mine. And for the first time in a long time, that feels like enough. The consequences didn't arrive all at once. They rarely do. They came in waves, quiet, delayed, unavoidable. At first, nothing seemed to change on Travis's side. At least not from what I could see. We weren't in contact. I blocked his number after the third unanswered text, not out of anger, but because every notification sent a jolt of anxiety through my body. I needed silence more than closure. But silence has a way of amplifying truth. Friends we'd shared stopped reaching out to me. Not aggressively, not cruelly, just slowly. Invitations that used to come automatically didn't anymore. Group chats went quiet. I understood without needing it explained. Choosing distance was easier than choosing sides. I didn't fight it. I was too busy rebuilding. What I didn't expect was how quickly Travis's version of events began to unravel on its own. A mutual acquaintance, someone neutral, someone who had no reason to lie, ran into me at a coffee shop one afternoon a few weeks after I'd moved into my studio. We exchanged pleasantries, the usual awkwardness hovering between us, until she hesitated and said, "I heard you and Travis separated. I'm really sorry." I thanked her, ready to steer the conversation away. Then she added carefully, "He seems confused. He's told different people different stories." That sentence stayed with me. Apparently, Travis had been oscillating publicly the same way he had privately, telling some people the divorce was mutual and amicable, telling others he'd been pushed, telling a few that he'd made a terrible mistake and lost the best thing that ever happened to him. The contradictions didn't make him sympathetic. They made him unreliable. His parents reached out once, just once, a short message asking if we could talk. I declined politely. I didn't owe anyone explanations anymore, and I wasn't going to reopen doors I'd worked so hard to close. From what I heard later, that refusal didn't sit well with them. They'd believed for a long time that I was the steady one, the responsible one, the one who held things together. My absence left a vacuum Travis couldn't fill with charm or excuses. At work, his focus slipped. He missed deadlines, took days off without explanation. The same emotional instability he'd unleashed at home followed him into professional spaces that didn't bend around his moods. I didn't celebrate that. I didn't need to. The truth was doing its own quiet work. Meanwhile, my life kept expanding in small, solid ways. I built routines that belonged only to me. Mornings with coffee and silence. Evenings with music I liked playing just because I liked it. I learned what it felt like to come home and not brace myself for someone else's energy. The fear faded slowly. The guilt lingered longer. There were nights I still questioned myself, wondered if I'd been too harsh, too quick to leave, too unwilling to work through things. Those thoughts usually came when I was tired or lonely, when my brain tried to romanticize the past. Then I'd remember the kitchen table on New Year's Day, the word relieved, the hand on my face, and the doubt would dissolve. I didn't leave because I stopped loving him. I left because I couldn't trust him not to dismantle my life again the next time he felt unsure. Eventually, news reached me through distant channels that Travis had started dating again. Quickly, intensely. He posted about new beginnings and learning lessons, framing himself as someone who'd been transformed by heartbreak. I felt nothing. No jealousy, no anger, just a quiet, detached understanding. Some people don't change patterns, they just change partners. The last thing I heard about him was months later, that he'd moved apartments again, that he was still figuring things out, that he talked about me like a turning point in his life. I hoped he meant that in a meaningful way. But whether he did or not no longer mattered, because the real fallout wasn't what happened to him. It was what happened to me. I learned that love without safety isn't love, it's endurance. That commitment without accountability is just control dressed up as devotion, and that leaving quietly can be the most powerful choice you ever make. I didn't destroy his life. I saved my own. I used to believe that love was proven by how much you were willing to give up. Dreams, plans, pieces of yourself. I thought sacrifice was the highest form of devotion, that if you loved someone deeply enough, the universe would meet you halfway and reward your faith. I was wrong. Love doesn't ask you to disappear. It doesn't make you smaller so someone else can feel bigger. It doesn't use words like divorce as leverage or confusion as an excuse to hurt you or fear as a way to keep you compliant. Real love is steady, it's accountable, and above all, it's safe. I'm not healed in some cinematic, perfect way. Healing isn't a finish line. It's a process that unfolds quietly in the choices you make when no one is watching. Some days, I still think about the graduate program I gave up and feel a sharp, familiar ache. I still imagine the city I might have called home, the version of myself I could have become. But I don't live in regret anymore, because I didn't lose my future. I delayed it. I learned to trust myself again, to listen when my body tightened, when my instincts whispered that something wasn't right. I learned that staying silent to keep the peace is not strength, it's self-erasure. Strength is leaving when you realize the cost of staying is your sense of safety, your confidence, your voice. I'm 24 now. I have a career I'm proud of, a small apartment that feels like mine in every sense of the word, friendships that don't require me to shrink or perform. I wear red lipstick because I like how it makes me feel. I eat mint chocolate chip ice cream without apologizing. I go to concerts alone and stand in the crowd knowing I don't need anyone else to validate my joy. Most importantly, I know this. You are not difficult for wanting consistency. You are not demanding for needing security. And you are not weak for walking away when love turns into something that scares you. If you're reading this and wondering whether it gets better after you leave, it does. Not all at once, not without grief, but in ways that feel solid and real and earned. Choosing yourself doesn't mean you failed at love. It means you finally understood what love is supposed to be.